Hello.
Hey,
How are you?
I'm good.
I started writing user stories, but I did not put them in the card. Maybe I should, but I don't know if they're in the quite what you expect, but still helps me.
You can add them to the Excel sheet at the bottom. Add a new section there because there's a difference between the one that we all went over and understand, and then the new ones that we still need to discuss to see whether or not we understand them.
Tentative user stories. Why does it? Oh, come on. Format. Merci.
The tentative ones are the ones in row 11. You don't need to add yet another one. You already added 3 there, of 2 there. The 2 bottom ones are yours.
Ah, yes.
And I don't know whether these are still relevant, but I kept them there.
No, damn it.
Hi, Timothy.
Is that just the 3 of us? Felix is not there. I don't know if Bentley said he'd make it.
Now at least.
I know he's around because we two had this conversation about who's key. It's difficult to, I've been struggling with that myself, the question of how to express lack of activity, and we're evolving a set of definitions. We want to be consensual, but then somebody is
well, at the very least, we know in this process who checked off their names or not. That's already an important part. We can still let other people.
There's people who check. There's people who checked and people who gave a negative comment. So we know why they unchecked. They didn't check.
We so incorporated most of the negative comments, I think.
But, yeah, that's where I was going. Maybe we need to have a way to say this was incorporated so that we know that if there's a negative comment standing, it's as opposed to.
But that's essentially what I mean, the preparation for these meetings are supposed to be. But of course, if people aren't attending, which has happened in all meetings,
well, yeah, which is normal.
Then we are simply the core, and then I think we can move forward with just the 4 of us. I guess Felix is pretty active as well still.
Yeah.
And Bentley's keeping himself on the sideline, so I would say it's not essential, even though he's more than welcome to chip in. It seems like Timothy is not here yet. He's still muted.
Okay. I'm here. I'm having lunch. I was taking care of some things. I'm getting lunch.
It is an hour later in Brazil. I keep forgetting.
quickly need to check something here. Something unrelated.
Okay, so then let's start.
Just a second, wrapping something up. Let's see whether anyone else is coming. Okay.
Do you mind if before we start the meeting, since it's been a while since our last meeting, I'd like to do a little check-in of what I've been doing since then.
I do mind because I think it's gonna quickly detract from the meeting agenda.
Okay.
You can do it on mine. You can do it tomorrow on my day.
Okay.
Unless it's just an update without any, I mean, but you can also write it in Hangouts.
Oh, it's just, okay.
And if it's a status update, we can each just do 1 minute update.
I wanted us to do a status update each if we have status updates. I think it's good, or stand-up practice than saying let's discuss that.
Yeah, but it should be time boxed, right? So then we can
absolutely
each do 1 minute.
Sure. Sounds good.
Go ahead.
Okay. I've been working on implementation data model for these immutable things, and the thing that's really that I'm thinking about right now is I have an old version of a statement. I want to know about all the newer versions. There could be many of them. So is there a way to have a subset or have it kind of fractally defined so that I say, here's the key versions, and you can look at less key versions through more queries. And in a way that's, so it's turning out to be a bit of a heap structure on the later definitions. So this is what I'm thinking about these days. Over.
That sounds relevant to pick up on during the modeling talks with Timothy.
Exactly.
You any status update, Timothy? You've been very quiet at past meetings, including now.
Because I'm chewing. No, I don't have anything to say. I mean, obviously, we're going very slowly through things. I haven't had any spare time to work on stuff in between meetings. And I'm trying to be quiet so I listen more rather than cause controversy to see if we can get forward. Every time somebody has just one little thing, it turns into a half hour, one little thing. So I'm trying to be quiet, essentially. I know where the controversy is going to happen here, and so I'm just kind of waiting to get there because most of the stuff I'm okay with. So yeah.
Okay. I think I know you don't have much time outside of meetings, but then considering that we are the essential 4 people, including Felix, it would be relevant to see why you haven't accepted the acceptable immutable claim yet at this point. Given the update with it based on your feedback, the second bullet point I think we added after feedback from you. Does that mean that now you do find this definition useful, or there's still something that you're considering and want to bring up at some point?
Yeah, I have to refresh my memory, but I think I didn't accept it because as a definition, I'm fine with it. But the moment you're applying it to a use case that is supposed to be in the system, I don't want to accept a use case in which the claim, the format of a claim is an image. That's
okay.
I'm against that.
But that's interesting because we haven't defined the system yet. I think it's related to the undefined claim repository entity here, which is actually why I added claim repository as a required definition. So I think in that sense, you can essentially accept the definition because you're disagreeing with a specific system and we haven't defined the system yet. So you explicitly said you agree with the definition. You
Well, this is
simply
what
don't want.
confused me about the process, is because you say that the goal of these definitions is to have definitions that you use in use cases.
Mhm.
I'm understanding that the use cases are supposed to be for the system.
You don't
Otherwise,
have
what are we
to.
talking about here, right?
We're not talking about agreeing or disagreeing with this use case. So what you're saying essentially is to disagree with this use case, because this use case implies that you can add images and you don't want to add images. All you have to agree with
Correct.
is this definition. So you can say, I don't want to support acceptable immutable claims which are images in my system. So in order to be able to make that expression and so we understand each other, you need to agree on this definition. That's all this is about. We're not agreeing at this point whether or not the system should support all acceptable immutable claims to be added.
Yeah, that line is a little fuzzy to me. You know, okay, check me off there. I'm fine with that. I'll have that argument wherever it comes up again. But you know, I understand the definition. I think it's a usable definition.
That's all we need at this point. And then I think I know where you had it, and you don't want, yeah, exactly. You want to support a subset of acceptable immutable claims still. And that's worth talking about at that point. Okay. What else is on the agenda? That was one. The other one, evaluate. Yeah. So I added a key new user story. This one, to contrast basically, essentially with the first one. If the first user story, which Timothy apparently doesn't fully agree with, is as a web author, I want to link to an accepted immutable claim. Another one related, like where does the accepted immutable claim even come from, would be as a web author, I want to contribute an immutable claim to a claim repository so that it may become an accepted immutable claim, which I can link to from my web contents. So this is pretty much the origin story of an accepted immutable claim we're missing, which I dubbed a contributed immutable claim, and which is a proposed next definition I think we can hopefully fairly easily align on. So first things first, is this user story clear?
Yes, to me.
To me, it seems to be yes.
I'm gonna add it. Actually, I think I'm even gonna add it as the first one because, but then I'm gonna confuse the IDs. That's not good. What? Then we can remove this one.
Did we lose one in the process?
No.
No.
So these are the work in progress of the to be built. Okay. Okay, then we can go to the actual definition. Do we agree that this is a useful thing to try to align on, a contributed immutable claim, as per what this user story is trying to talk about?
Yep.
Yep.
So then I'll add it in alignments. I'll already remove this one for now. And then I can do a quick read through of what I wrote up for now. A claim added to a claim repository, which intends to be an acceptable immutable claim, but might not yet be. As long as a claim hasn't been accepted, it can be edited or even removed. In other words, there is no shared immutable representation yet. Once a claim is accepted, it becomes an accepted immutable claim. That's the current definition. Is that clear so far?
Yeah, but I have a question.
Yeah, shoot.
I guess that this includes what I would say claims in either symbol or topic form. Am I right? Or
So you're referring to
any form. Any form. There's no whatever
yeah,
it
that's
takes
what I'm
to
checking.
edit it to become, yeah.
It can be pure text or it can be rich structure.
Yeah, you could say it's a mutable version of the immutable claim. So it differs to the definition of immutable claim to what it can be. And indeed, it doesn't say anything about form or whatsoever, which is also partially what I think Timothy wants to talk about later.
Yeah. I'm okay. And my second, it's not a question, but more a comment. Mm-hmm. I don't see why we need mutability. What we need is evolvability. So it can be a sequence of immutable versions.
I think we need both. I think what this is trying to highlight is that not all things are relevant to keep in the history of evolvability. I think evolvability we can get to later. What
Okay.
this is trying to emphasize is that's a separate use case. What we're trying to do here is like weed out the early wrong ones. Like if you check the matches definition, buy Viagra at www.viagra.com. Do you really want to evolve that claim into something that later is removed? For
Yes.
example, do you really want to evolve the Earth is flat if you catch it early on that it's a typo, etc. So it's really more of a if
Yeah, typos are a very good case in point for editability. I agree. Viagra is interesting because in a way, my temptation would be let's keep it so next time it comes, we know that this is refused and spam and remember decisions always. And even up to a point, it could apply to typo if we had infinite storage, though I agree that it gets a bit, but you see what I'm saying?
yeah, I know.
I see what you're saying, and I mean, as far as the system goes, what I'd like to see in it, I'm more on the side of everything's immutable, or everything's versioned, but version is something we haven't talked about, but is essentially just another form of.
It's another word for
immutable. Yeah. So we don't need to get into that right now. I do think that there needs to be a permanent record. I think that there needs to be a permanent record of what was submitted and the changes that were made and by whom, which means, maybe according to how we're treating immutability, I disagree that this is mutable.
Up to a point, it's an implementation detail. Up to a point, it isn't. We agree it needs to evolve. Whether it's by mutability or versioning is.
Right.
I'm not sure
maybe
mutation is part of the definition.
Maybe we need a definition for immutable, right? Because the way I'm bending its meaning towards my goals is immutable means that there is complete history tracing.
Yeah, but that's one thing.
There is a sense of history, which means there's a sense of evolution or changes. In other words, something replaced something else, right?
Yeah, no, I'm pretty much with you on that. So the question is mutable? Like I would put it in another way. The immutability of these other claims, like the card you had a second ago, is that an empirical statement or is that a definitional statement? I don't think it's a definitional statement. There's a need for mutating them, but whether it will be accomplished with or without preserving history is an implementation question.
I think, Timothy,
it's
we're
not an
broadening
implementation question, because I'm going to create use cases wherein, like, as a user or as I don't know, we have to figure out who it applies to, but as one who has contributed a contributed immutable claim, I would like to be able to see everything that happened to my claim and by whom, which means it will be a system requirement that I'm going to propose, and that's not just an implementation detail.
Correct.
Well, so because the word immutable comes from the previous definition we already talked about, the main key thing is the fact that it's something that you can link to, which always has the same representation. So if you are ever gonna introduce terminology about versioning, it will necessarily need to build on top of something like this, or it can.
I agree.
You don't have to.
Yep.
So
yes.
But that's why I'm saying, going back to the contributed immutable claim.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I would argue that I guess I would want it to be immutable.
You want all, so you're arguing probably you don't need any mutable claims in the first place. And then.
Yep.
Yeah, what are claims? And okay, like for example, if somebody adds buy Viagra at www.viagra.com, is that an acceptable immutable claim? Is it an
no, that's not the point.
Acceptable, no. It's
No,
not acceptable.
we're not saying it's acceptable. That's absolutely not the point we're making.
So, but what is it at that point?
It's a contributed immutable claim.
But it should be
Correct.
still mutable, is what you're saying.
No,
No,
Sorry, it should still be immutable.
it should still be immutable. Yes.
yes.
Immutable in the sense that the meaning of the word as it comes from here, that it's a shared immutable representation we want to be able to link
I didn't
to.
say, well, it probably would be shared, but I guess so. Yeah. Yeah. It doesn't fulfill the other criteria, which means, it's maybe not sufficient to decide whether agreement, for example, and it's other criteria, right? It's not a full immutable claim.
Exactly, which is why I would make it mutable, because it's not.
Except that I'm going to propose a use case in which, as a contributor, I want to link permanently to a contribution I have made.
Yeah, but
And
that's
as a
something
separate
different.
use case, I would want to
Yes.
link. I would like to see records of every change that has been made to my.
Yeah. To your contributed immutable claim. So, but
Yeah.
nothing. Again, I think we need to find a different word. There's a big difference between immutability from an implementation perspective and from a conceptual perspective. If this definition of contributed immutable claim says that it's mutable, it doesn't mean that the state is lost. It simply means, as a concept, this thing can mutate. It doesn't say that that history of the mutation cannot be stored or whatsoever. That's an implementation detail. It simply says the concept is mutable.
I think, yeah. There's two things. There's three things really. There's linkable or not linkable, and I think it's good if those proto claims are linkable, though they could not be. I don't think it matters terribly. The question is acceptability. Acceptability varies in time, and it can vary in both directions. In the sense, a claim that is contributed initially is not yet known to be acceptable. We might immediately decide it's acceptable as is, or we might decide that no, it's not acceptable and make it evolve towards. And then there's a history of, by the way, if I want to see the future history of that original contributed unacceptable claim, we see that it has a natural evolution towards an acceptable immutable claim. And that's the question. Now, it can go the other way. Oh, this was acceptable, and then we found an ambiguity, so it's become less acceptable. And at least we don't want to use ambiguous claims, though maybe we've already used it, so then we need to review stuff. And
I think these are different use cases. I explicitly added this one does not match the definition to the rest of what you're saying right now. An accepted immutable claim, Obama was a president of the USA. If somebody wants to edit Obama to make it uppercase, this is not possible because it's already accepted. It's mutable. You cannot edit it. You can, however, create a new immutable claim that can become accepted with an uppercase, and then you can have the evolution over accepted.
That's exactly what I'm saying.
Yeah, but that was in different use cases.
No,
if you use this terminology,
that's exactly what I'm denying. I'm
Okay.
saying it's not a different use case. I'm saying it's
Okay.
the exact same story, saying this immutable claim evolves to that other immutable claim, whether it's accepted or not. The evolution of acceptability is one axis, and the evolution of claims is another axis. And the evolution of the life cycle of contributions is part of the acceptability evolution. And how claims evolve by saying, well, I propose replacing this claim by that claim, that's almost orthogonal. I mean, we have the ability to evolve our immutable claims. We need it because even immutable claims may have typos. Even accepted claims may have typos that we discover after the fact. We won't have perfect editors. And we certainly have this mechanism much more for initially contributed claims, but I don't see it as a fundamental difference. It's a difference of degree. We need to be able to link to, evolve, and find the latest evolved version of any immutable claim, whether acceptable or not. Whether initially unacceptable, later acceptable, acceptable even, can still evolve.
Yeah, I don't think that we disagree there. I think we're disagreeing on the language used to describe these things.
Exactly.
Because if you go that way, then this definition becomes mute. I mean, it can be anything. The definition no longer anything is an immutable claim, right? Also, Viagra, like this whole exercise was useless.
Uh,
Yeah, because you say anything is an immutable claim. So in other words, if somebody contributes pure spam, it's still an immutable claim.
well, maybe it's not a claim first.
I remember that immutable, that's circular, because remember that immutable claim was an attempt at defining one interpretation of claim. So what do you mean it's not, it doesn't have to be a claim?
No, what I'm saying is maybe the spam was not a claim. So maybe it's immutable, but not a claim. Maybe it's an immutable entity. That could be. Or an immutable non-claim. That's one thing. That's a detail. But the other detail is, for me, the important distinction, and one I'm still thinking about, by the way, is the distinction between symbol and topic. Symbol is just the text, and then there's the topic, which is an attempt to find the equivalence class between symbols and blah, blah, blah. We've been through that. So the immutable claim can be either but it's true. Immutable claim is not, if you forget the claim dimension, if you just take the immutable dimension, yeah, I don't see I think it's going to be something we want of all entities in the system, this immutability. And that doesn't make it useless to define the concept, but it's going to be a universal quality we want. At least to distinguish
you're defining immutability, not okay.
Yes. Yeah, the immutability.
What I hear you say is you want to retract your name here, essentially.
No, I'm not saying, no, I don't think so.
So where does Viagra.com, does it match its definition or doesn't it match the definition?
No, but it's on the claim axis, not on the immutability axis, that it fails to match it.
But this is just a name for a specific claim. Remember, this is a potato claim.
Yeah, but what I'm saying is Viagra.com is not a claim, it's an entity. So I'm saying it does not match this definition, not because of the immutability considerations, but because of the claim versus entity consideration, which got mixed, which shouldn't have been mixed, but they were. I'm saying it's the claim part of Viagra.com that I'm contesting. It's its claim nature, not its immutability nature. Also, it's not reference free, so that's also interesting. Immutable claim is mixing a lot of concepts, which is fine. It's a composite thing, and it's true. Viagra.com is not self. It's indexical, so that's cool. We put non-indexical in somewhere in that definition.
You're saying you want immutable entities.
Yes.
But how is that related to this discussion?
I'm saying,
because we're talking about claims right now.
Well, what I'm saying is the spam thing. The reason I would say you're asking me about the buy at Viagra.com. That's an injunction. It's not a claim. It's not an entity either. It's another kind of speech act.
The point is somebody tries to add an immutable claim.
Yes.
They're not trying to add an entity. They're trying to add added by someone. So somebody's trying to add by Viagra at Viagra.com as an immutable claim to the system.
Okay. The claim.
So it's not a discussion of whether it's an entity or not.
Okay. I see what you're saying. And okay, but okay, that's interesting. Maybe we will need to retract, because what you're saying is, because they declare it as a claim, I have to consider it a claim. For me, that was not part of the definition of immutable claim. Well, like anything claimed by someone to be a claim is not part of what I thought.
That's why we introduced acceptable and accepted as a distinct definition.
That's different. That's different. That's about somebody agreed that it's an immutable claim. What I'm saying is, if no, here I'm saying claim to be an immutable claim. Somebody claims that by Vigrad.com, I'm saying I'm entering it as a claim. Okay, it's not acceptable, but it's claimed to be a claim. And you're saying, okay, is that an immutable claim? Well, it was entered in the category immutable claim because somebody put it there, and that makes it an immutable claim under consideration. And I admit I did not think that immutable claim had to include any claim, any non-claim entered pretending to be a claim.
It doesn't. That's why it's a distinct thing we're trying to define right now.
So
It's something, the use case is that somebody's trying to add an immutable claim. Like what language should we use to describe that? And what language do we use to
and I see your point. It's a proposed
Voice contributed would be a potato mutable claim for the sake of this discussion again.
Yeah. I see what you're saying. But what I'm saying is it's the claim. If they propose something, I must state that, sorry, we have a guest soon and I have a hard stop. Hello. Okay, how I would treat it. Somebody would propose something, and it's not, the potato is not an immutable, it's a contributed topic. They're moreover claiming that this topic, and it's a simple topic because they're probably entering it as a symbol. So
sorry, no, 10 steps back, please. Start from the top.
Yeah. Well, you're asking me to work with definitions that are not jiving with the question you're asking.
No, but it's starting from the user story that somebody wants to add an immutable claim. Yes. So I don't know, all of a sudden you change it to saying they want to add a symbol. No, that's not the user story. And okay. If so, what is a symbol? And if so, what is a so that? Then you're saying I want to discuss a different user story, which is fine, but that's also scheduled for today.
Okay. The first question, what is a symbol? What is a topic? That was Friday's conversation.
Exactly, but that's not what we're talking about now.
They've been defined. Okay, what I'm saying is claim is a kind of topic. And I want to contribute an immutable claim as an example of I want to contribute a topic. And when you want to contribute an immutable claim, I want to contribute a topic also claiming that this topic happens to be a claim.
Fair enough. Using your terminology that you introduced uniformly, and we haven't checked on the glossary whether everyone agrees with, yes, I can follow you so far.
Yes. Now, they put something which is clearly not a claim in this case. They're proposing it as a topic. I would say, okay, it's a contributed topic, which happens to be a simple topic. It's reduced to its symbol because there was no structure. And the first question is, well, not the first question, but one of the questions we may ask is that even a claim? They claim it's a claim. Is it true? No. That's already suspicious. That's a reason to reject it, probably. Or to make it unacceptable, saying, well, that's not, it claims to be a claim and it isn't.
I have an insight here that might explain why I make this major distinction between accepted and why it's totally unrelated to versioning. Like, for example, I would not allow to add an immutable claim that hasn't been accepted as supporting arguments to another immutable claim. Only accepted claims can be added to accepted claims. That's the key thing. That's the key
I agree
thing.
Totally.
And that's the distinction between that. So maybe that needs to be clear in these definitions, because that is what this is about. It's not about version.
Well, it shouldn't be clear in the definition. It should be clear in a use case, right?
True. But does that make sense what I'm after here? That's a distinction between accepted and not accepted. Once something is accepted, it becomes linkable and it has a permanent representation, because once you link to it from many different places, it becomes near impossible to change that representation without any potential repercussions.
I agree with the intention, but I disagree on 2 points. Okay. One is it's possible to link to unacceptable definitions.
For the sake of adding supporting arguments, etc. Because again, are you just linking to an old version, or are you linking to add an argument?
I'm linking to okay. There's many sub-use cases to that. One is, first, acceptance is not permanent. So it's possible that I've linked to it. I thought it was permanent. I thought it was acceptable. It was decided later that it became non-acceptable because ambiguity was identified a posteriori. And so it's a possible system state that you link something unacceptable. It has to be corrected. We aim to only link at acceptable things within, for the sake of premise and support.
You mentioned one interesting thing. So you're saying that stuff can become, the state of an accepted immutable claim can change to
unacceptable. Yes.
Well, at that point, it's no longer.
The state for me is not part of the immutable part. It's a state.
Yeah.
Okay. Second, I think there is a use case to saying I contributed this thing to the repository. We don't know if it's accepted or not yet, but I still want to link to it. We don't know if it makes sense to use it as support for something, but I still want to link to it so that when it evolves into something useful, I'll have the link and I'll be able to update the link. But it'll be easier to update the link if I've kept the link in the first place. If I've been able to link to the draft, let's call it a draft. So that's another use case, separate, distinct. So that's the first thing I wanted to say. And I may have lost the second. Let me remember. Wish I had the recording. No, I think I've lost the second because you cut me at the first.
While you think about that, can we talk about the meaning of immutable then?
Well, the current intended meaning is fully defined by the original thing that introduced it, right? I mean, remember this before was called a bare claim.
But what is the meaning of immutable?
It's a shared immutable representation which people can blah, 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 blah. What is it?
No, that's the claim part.
It's immutable in the sense that the same representation of that claim will always be represented as such when you link to it. That's what immutable means in the context.
Right,
of this
which according to that meaning, I would want contributions to be immutable.
Yes, but contributions are not claims, because not any contribution will match.
Okay, but I still want them to be immutable.
Yes. Yes,
that's the point I'm discussing. The going back to our contributed immutable claim.
Yeah.
In fact, I made a comment below that I don't like the name because by definition it's not not immutable. It is mutable, but I actually think it should be immutable. After thinking through it in our discussion today, because of a use case I want to introduce at some point, which is that the contributor will want to see their original contribution, and they will want to be able to, as a second case or as part of that use case, track changes that were made to there.
Yes, but again, changes to accepted immutable claims or changes to contributions that
contributions.
To contributions.
But I think they're two separate use cases, because
no, I think
there are separate use cases. I said, well, that is okay.
So like I'm fully important tracking changes of something that has once been accepted. The whole point of it being accepted is that your version history is guaranteed, so to speak. You can link to it. It can be used in argument trees. It can be used in whatever other structures.
Okay, that's a different thing. We understand that the other definitions are that it has a certain format and it adheres to the structure of a claim. That's the immutable claim. And then the second part is the accepted immutable claim, which is that it adheres to certain other criteria, or acceptable, that it adheres to further criteria. And then the accepted, which is more like a state on the acceptable immutable claim. Okay, I understand those distinctions. And they all have their uses and use cases. What I'm saying is that there's a use case that I want to introduce that will require contributions to be immutable in the sense that it's being used.
Yeah, let's do it now, actually. So it's probably as a
Contributor.
well, I'm gonna even say in the context of what we haven't really defined any actors yet, but yeah, it doesn't matter. As a contributor wants to contribute an immutable claim to a claim repository.
No.
And
well,
okay.
that's I guess that's the definition of what a contributor is, right? It's one who has contributed. It's as a contributor, I want to view my contribution at any time in the original
Which
state it was
contribution?
submitted.
What is a contribution?
A contribution of well, then we get the definition of contributable immutable claim. Contributed immutable claim is the definition we're using there.
That's what I was writing, right?
Yeah, no, you were right. I think there's two use cases.
Contributed immutable claim I added to the system. In the original form, I added it so that I can keep track of changes made to it over time, or something like that.
Something like that.
That's a different use case. That's what I was
trying to say. Different, yeah. Right. But what I'm saying is that use case puts on a requirement of the contributed immutable claim that it be immutable, or at least be
the implementation of it. Yes.
No.
It's the concept. It's the concept. Like, do we
conceptually? It must be visible. We must preserve the entire history, right?
Yeah. So a contributed. What you're implying is a contributed immutable claim has history. Sure. And you can use it, and you can implement it as such, and you can do it implement it in an immutable way, in an immutable way. It doesn't matter. It's an implementation. Well, it's not an implementation detail. It becomes a requirement if you want to support this user story. But conceptually, the contributed immutable claim is mutable.
It's not more or less mutable than the accepted claim.
Well, that's a separate discussion. Yes, that we can talk about that.
Discussion. Yeah.
Yeah, but okay, I agree there's two user stories and they're separate, and different systems may not implement both. There you have a point, Stephen, that the tracking of proposed claims and the tracking of accepted claims have different requirements and different priorities. On the other hand, I think it's the same user story in the sense that you have a handle on something and you want to see what happens to it. It happens that it's more important in the case where it's being accepted, validated, yada, yada, yada. But the mechanisms are likely to be the same. The views are likely to be the same.
No, the views are not likely to be the same. That's a key distinction. That's why it's a separate user story. The mechanics maybe, but again, these are user stories. They're not system modeling.
I agree with that point.
So the view would be essentially different, because in once it's an accepted claim, then you can link to it. You can start using it, and we can talk about whether or not it can become unaccepted and whether you no longer can link to it, which wasn't my intent originally, but we haven't indeed discussed that.
Okay, we agree that linking is essential for accepted claim.
Yes.
We think for those systems that choose to allow linking to contributed claims,
but that's a separate user story. Can I continue?
That's a separate user story. I did say it's two user stories,
okay.
But I say on the other hand, it is the same user story, because if you accept the user story that is also applies to contributed claims, which is an extension of that user story in a way, it's a subcase, then the way you'll do it for those will be the same.
The implementation maybe, but can I continue my explanation of why the views will be different?
Go.
So in one case, the whole reason for accepted immutable claims, you can link to it, and yeah, you might be notified, maybe like, hey, there's some evolutions, it might be less ambiguous, isn't that? That's a lot of the use cases we have talked about before. In the other one, it will be, hey, here are suggested changes to this claim, because right now you can't link to it yet. Like the very thing you can't link to it yet, and the very thing, once it becomes accepted, hey, now you have an immutable permalink, you can start to use to refer to this claim. And the other one, it's more like a whole back and forth, like some moderation, curation thing of
and I think
what needs to happen in order for this thing to become accepted. Do you really think this will become the same UI?
I'm saying we need to be precise in what we mean by link to it. I agree with you that the unacceptable contributed claim cannot be linked as a support or oppose. It cannot be made part of an argument, but we may still link to it from the outside. And I'm in my blog and I'm saying I'm contributing this argument to the CDL, and that is a link. It's
so we need to indeed, what all of this discussion is highlighting is that link is highly ambiguous, and we need to improve the definition of accepted to make clear what linking means. And it has to do indeed with the ability of this immutable claim to be used as part of other structures in the system. The most obvious one that I can think of is a support or oppose of another claim, but we haven't even defined that.
But there's other cases.
Yes, others, yeah,
but I agree with you. Okay, then I agree with you. But what I'm saying is, with the definition of link to it from our site, which is not the same definition, then either claim is equally linkable. So when you say
agreed,
you cannot link to it, I disagree. And for me, that use case of link from website is enough to justify traceability.
Yes. Okay. But so that's not what I intended with linked here. And
I understand.
That's not okay. So we need to elaborate on that.
But I'm saying your definition of linking does not justify distinct mechanisms of history tracking.
Yes. Correct.
Cool.
So we need to update that, because that's not a link to what that was intended.
Okay, excellent.
So let's try to pinpoint that in a.
Okay, so I think it can, once accepted, it can be linked to from external sources. That almost
not
goes.
Sufficient.
No, 1 second. This almost goes in the immutable claim, and any immutable claim can be linked to from external sources. Or at least in some systems, because I agree that this is a choice. However, once accepted, it can be reused in other immutable, I would say, topics.
Well, we haven't defined topics, so let's try to define it in place for now, which would be once accepted.
It can be used in the definition of other claims or topics.
Yeah, something along those lines. It can be used in arguments and pretty much any other structure in the system where it could
that's
be
why
used,
I said,
right?
Yeah, because it can be used in the definition of an entity. It can be a defining claim for an entity, for example.
So what we're essentially saying is you can't link to it from within the claim repository.
Yes.
Once it's accepted, it can be used as part of or linked to. Well,
it can be used as part of other structure-rich topics. I would say other topics in the repository. But let's say structures for now. Because
structures, yeah, let's be broad, but then let's add an example to be clear. Arguments, definitions within the same claim repository. And again, claim repository, we will need to define it at some point.
Yeah.
But I think this is the key thing that we have been arguing about this meeting.
Yes.
And this is a much better definition of accepted immutable claim.
That's
accepted.
Improved.
Yeah.
That's improved. I approve.
I'm gonna uncheck Felix and Timothy. We can talk about it later. Move this immutable claim. I'm not gonna do that now, just for the sake of not complicating that definition. Let's reread. Once accepted, can be used as part of other structures.
But can we keep it to do? Even if we push it elsewhere, I'd like to not lose it.
Did I cut it? I'm
Yes, you
just
did.
going to add it as a comment then.
Yeah, that's fine. Add it as a comment is fine.
No, I lost it. See,
Oh.
if there was an immutability here and I could go back in time, I think I can.
I think you can, yes.
Can you? No.
Oh,
Trello.
God.
Trello does not have a full history, which we do once. But this is where it gets tricky, because a full history is only as useful as each point in the history is meaningful to the user. And that's why it's very easy to say we want everything to be immutable and nothing to be lost. But the key distinction of accepted here is that at a certain point in time, a group of users has decided that this is a meaningful point of time in history, which is something completely different than a contributed immutable claim. Sure, which can also have its history, it can link to individually, but it's at a lower level of abstraction in a way, you could say.
I even agree with that. You know, the requirements are different user stories, but on the other hand, they are the same user stories. It's complicated.
Like I agree with it from a theoretical point of view, but I think in practice we don't know what is meaningful and what isn't. And the reason for the use case I put forward is you want to see if somebody is making changes to your things. You want to know if it is an attack or an act of censorship on what you're doing, and which means every change needs to be traceable in that way. It's auditing, right?
Yeah, and I think that's a valid user story, and we should add it. But I think it's a different user story from detecting the history of how a claim has evolved over time for the sake of understanding how concepts evolve, as opposed to understanding.
Sure.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Okay, I think this is progress. I'm just going to add the to-do note here so we remember. Should we include external linkability into this definition from other web resources? That's the summary, more or less. The previous write-up was nicer, but I lost it. Sorry.
Absolutely fine.
So, Timothy, this new updated definition of accepted, can you agree on that? That is a key thing that we want to define, like the key differentiating factor from a contributed immutable claim and an accepted one is that a contributed one can be used in other structures like arguments and definitions, but an accepted one can.
Yeah, that one gets to the heart of how I want to design moderation, right? Which means it's something I'm willing to try, but at some point I may not want that, right? I can agree with it as a definition. I can agree with it as a use case for now, right? We can even build the system this way, and I'll say, no, this didn't work out, right? Essentially by agreeing to this, I'm giving into one way of, the Socrates way of accepting things to be used, right? As opposed to always being contributed. And then, the way I was building Gruff would be you contribute and it's visible to everybody. And then, you'd have a curator go in and remove and that sort of thing and evolve. So by accepting this, I'm accepting a different approach. At the very least, there's a gatekeeper step, right? Okay, I'm willing to give that a try for now. I don't think it's worth talking about.
I'm not sure that's a consequence.
No, it shouldn't be. I mean, I understand how language is important and it might guide us towards this being the way we want to implement it. But the thing is, if you want to implement it a different way, then just suggest the solution here is to suggest an alternate use case. Because yes,
by definition now, once it is accepted, it needs to reach the state of accepted before it can be used attached to other objects, right? Which means for it to be used as an argument, it needs to be accepted.
Yes.
That is in the definition, right? Yes. So if I accept the definition, I'm accepting that.
Yes. Well, no, you're accepting that that's what that means. You're not accepting that that's needed. You can still argue that you don't want to talk about accepted immutable claims.
Yeah, go ahead and mark me as accepting the definition. I'm okay with that for now.
Mhm.
If it comes up and I disagree, we'll talk about it. But,
Well, it will be
Yeah.
interesting right now to consider other use cases and actually to update the
Yeah.
current ones, because the current one uses, which I can link to from my web content, which is no longer relevant. So that would really be so that as a web author, I want to contribute an immutable claim to claim trend, so that it may become an accepted immutable claim, so that I can construct arguments I can link to from my web page or something along those lines. It's really about evolving the richer structure. And it would be interesting to see how what would have envisioned then as an alternative if you don't have that state implemented in the system. Do you envision another state with the different definition or different user stories entirely?
But the question of the
sorry, my
gatekeeper,
dog needed a snack.
but the story of the gatekeeper, really, the question is, do we accept proposed stories as acceptable by default unless proven otherwise versus unaccepted by default unless proven accepted? Where is the burden of proof? That's a totally different question.
Right. You know, if I were to write up the use cases for the white paper, it would be accepted by default, and then a curator could go in and make the changes, right?
Yeah, but
if I wanted to take the approach of like community moderation, where everything is permanent and there is no such thing as accepting, you know, it's only I have the observer, then I would do everything by votes on relevance and scoring, right? And so you wouldn't ever have acceptable. You would instead have thresholds and scoring. But so I'm just going with this set of use cases for now.
Going with, by the way, threshold and scoring, acceptability is, you know, acceptable enough, and until proven otherwise, it's all transitional. I think I'll call my system Heraclitus at some point. So I was describing a state of my system to someone, and he said, "Okay, Heraclitus and Wittgenstein." Yeah, I guess. Sure enough.
I think it's still interesting, Timothy, because what your use case does, and I agree it's an alternate way, you can start using any contribution. So you're even saying immutable claim, it's not necessarily what you're using here, because any contribution could be added, and then later, and yeah, the system might say, well, this is an immutable claim or something. It gets the staple of approval, or it gets edited. But what that leaves out is the entire, like, how do you implement that? Like, what happens? What happens if you remove an argument? What happens with the supporting arguments of the argument, etc.? The key thing that this accepted thing is useful for is that it is immutable. It's a shared immutable representation. Once it's added like that, it never leaves the system as such. I think what is hidden in the alternate use case of
other complexities.
Which
solves one problem by adding other ones. Well, what do you do when you realize that it's insufficient? You create copies. So you're creating lots of simultaneously active minor variations on the same claim, all being used as arguments or something against something.
That's when we get to equivalence clauses, indeed. Yeah.
So it just kind of moved the complexity somewhere else.
Yes, but it supports the user story in that sense that you can still link to it. Whereas if in the case where you have a curator and you can no longer link to it, or it doesn't have the same representation anymore.
No, with a curator, as long as you have complete history and transparency, you can link back to a point in time version, right? You can link and see the map exactly at the moment you contribute.
Can you?
Yes.
If
I don't understand why you don't see that being possible.
Like I think we had this discussion before. Like, how do you understand that? Does it mean that you have a full snapshot of the entire claim repository for each individual single edit, and when you link to
No.
to something.
You have versioning moment in time. It's like a ledger, right?
Yeah, but how do you know
can see what's happened in the ledger?
what's the scope of your version? Is it a claim? Is it a claimant's relations? Is it multiple claims? How
It's
what
like
is the
a moment
scope
in time. It's a point in
what?
time.
Of which scope? I understand the time aspect, but of what?
What do you mean of what? Of
What
the
is
system.
versioned? Which entity is versioned?
Everything.
Yeah, so you're saying that the entire claim repository is versioned, and if you link to a moment in
To a
time, you
point in
link to
time.
that full claim repository at a point in time, and then you just link to a subset within the full claim repository, essentially. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, I mean, well, it's a graph. You're always going to have to link to everything, right? But you select what you're displaying of the graph. You see it at a moment in time, and then what you would have to do is there's two kinds of links. There's either point in time link, in which case you'll see it at it was at that time, or there's current state, which is you see how it is now. But you can scroll back and forward in time, so you can see how it was. And if
but that's not what we want, right? Because and that's where that's where the main difference lies. The whole reason for linking to a claim is not to link to a point in time. I want to link and have all the new additions of other people to it. But what am I really linking to if that thing has moved, or has been deleted, or has been renamed at that point in time?
It's you're linking to a snapshot, and then as it evolves, you may want to update your state to say, oh, this is still valid with the new version of that claim or of that topic or of that entity. But
practice,
until then,
here's the thing is that I see linking at a moment in linking to your contribution as an act of vanity, right? I want to show you what I did, right?
You don't want to link to
now.
The whole reason for linking, the original use case where it was there, was to see all the other contributions that link to the same thing. But
so
you're saying you're not linking to the same thing, you're linking to a snapshot, meaning you're never going to see the contributions of that came after. You'll always see like, oh,
so the default version would be I link to this claim. I link to this claim as it is represented currently. I see all the changes that have happened to it over time. And oh my God, it's not in my wording. I'm so offended because it's not my space. That's not what I want. I don't care. That's what I'm saying. It's a vanity thing of what I contributed. Look, I did this. Whereas, no, all this stuff has happened over time. What I don't want is duplication, which means, oh, I contributed this. This is my claim. And all these people had a debate around it. Oh, but you know what? Somebody else contributed their nearly identical claim on a different website and had a completely different debate on the same thing elsewhere when it's really the same thing, right?
But you can still highlight that while maintaining the original, because people don't contribute. Well, what I envision is that people don't contribute individual claims. They want to contribute arguments and argument graphs. That's the point, because if they only contribute claims, they're not doing so. The question is, if that is mutable, you're always going to link to a snapshot. Like, how are you going to show the latest version of something that has fundamentally changed over time?
Well, you have to have a mechanism to scroll around in time and see how it's evolved over time.
No, but you said by default you link to the latest version. What are you going to link to? Like, I want to link to arguments. I want to link to claims.
Well,
I want to even link to a subgraph. There is no subgraph in the latest version.
No, there would be a subgraph. So there's two different approaches. That I have a hard stop. I have to go. But what you link to is either the graph with a depth of n, or you use the kind of publisher interface, which is I want to show these nodes have been approved by me for display, right? And in that case, we need to require servicing. You are showing X% of the graph. You are not showing the whole picture, right?
Yeah, but those are the ways because the graph itself changes. Yeah, it's something to think about, because I don't think it's that easy.
Okay, we'll have to think about it. I'm late for my meeting. I have to go. But yeah.
See you next time.
I'm waving, but you don't see me. Bye.